And good evening and good morning, as I mentioned earlier, depending on which country and time zone you are dialing in from. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the New Economy Conference, organized by GlobalSF and co-hosted by the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, also known as GoBiz. My name is Darlene Chu Bryant. I'm the founder and executive director of GlobalSF. Housekeeping to start. Today's program is simple. We have 3 speakers and then a panel discussion. Should you have a question for any of our speakers, please enter your questions into the Q&A section on the bottom bar. Do not enter any question into the chat room. We will not be responding to any questions you enter there. And now to start our program. I always like to provide context. So shall we take a walk down memory lane? Back in 2005, when I worked for then Mayor Gavin Newsom as his Chief Deputy Communications Director, I staffed on his very first trip to China. He really didn't know what to expect. He had a lot of new, unexpected experiences, all good, of course, and came back excited to start a China desk that could help Chinese investors land in San Francisco. He kept true to his word and started China SF in 2008. In 2015, Mayor Ed Lee decided to build upon the work of China SF and added Latin SF and SF Asia. Then in 2018, I was asked to start Global SF as a standalone, independent economic development organization as a nonprofit to focus on international business development to continue to support the city of San Francisco's efforts to recruit investors and companies, as well as help local companies expand overseas. We have clearly expanded our footprint. We are a member of the California Trade and Investment Network, GoBiz, an affiliate member of the Small Business Development Center, and work alongside all our fellow economic development organizations in the state of California to ensure that we will benefit from inbound investment and outbound opportunities. As the 5th largest economy in the world, California will and must continue to maintain that position. Even with the US-China trade war, California continues to be China's biggest trading partner. With the pandemic, we have had to learn to be resilient, and now we must come out with a stronger economy. This conference is not to talk about what we have done, but to articulate and decide upon what we need to do better and how. GlobalSF intends to continue to work alongside each and every one of our partners and stakeholders for our home state of California. And I hope that you will join us for the next 5 conversations in the following weeks. I'm delighted that we have so many elected officials interested in our ambitious agenda that echoes what they are thinking about and want to hear from the private sector, the businesses large and small that fuel our economy. Thank you for joining us today. I'm now honored to invite Senate Majority Leader Bob Hertzberg to give introductory remarks. Senator Hertzberg really needs no introduction. He served as the 64th Speaker of the Assembly before returning to the private sector to become a clean energy entrepreneur. After deciding to run for public office, he has served as state senator since 2014, second time, for public office. Senator Hertzberg, you have the stage. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Darlene. Thank you so much. I don't see myself here, but hopefully, as long as you can confirm to me that I'm here, that would be great. Listen, Darlene, you're just great. We've known each other for a long time, and thanks for including me. I enthusiastically, when Bruce called, I enthusiastically wanted to join and participate both in the opening remarks and the concluding remarks. As some of you may know, Mr. Pickering served more than 2 decades ago for me as the head of the Speaker's Office of International Relations. And there's a couple other quick kind of points of personal privilege, as we like to say here in the legislature. I want to give a shout out to Dee Dee Myers, who's been a friend in the days of Tom Bradley in Los Angeles and doing a great job at GoBiz. I see that Jonathan Wetzel's part of this from McKinsey, who's been helping us like crazy on issues in Southern California. I used to co-chair California Forward, with Mike Weinberg. That was in old days, and I see that the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation is also part of this, that I chaired in 2004 and 2011. Great group of people, really insightful, I think, in terms of this issue, and I am delighted to be a part of this kickoff. I got to tell you, I just want to echo what Darlene said about it's so important for us in government to have this marriage between the business sectors, NGO, academics, and the like, to come up with the best and most innovative ideas. So I am ecstatic about participating in this. My chief of staff, Freddie, well, I can't participate in all of these. Freddie Quintana is going to be on all of these things, taking notes and being involved and helping to offer assistance. I just want to put a little context, if I can, on a couple of points before I turn it over for the introductory video from our governor. And that is context. Context on November 18th, 1991, the cover of Time magazine was entitled California, the Endangered Dream. In a series of articles, Time wrote that, quote, California's fabled magnetism is reversing itself, and that the very qualities that have lured millions of Californians for 50 years are threatening to disappear. Among their observations, they said, Time said that we are choking on smog. No new industry will come to California. Well, tell that to the folks at Apple, the biggest company in the world, or the hundreds of new companies in Silicon Valley since November 18th, 1991, or Silicon Beach, or Orange County Biotech, companies like Qualcomm and others who are reinventing how we do things. And the AQMD called nearly 50 stage 1 smog alerts in 1990 and none in 2013. The point is that what happens, and I'm going to give you a couple of other quick examples I think are important before I turn it over to the governor. You know, we saw in Darlene's opening picture, she had a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, let me tell you something. In 1924, Harper's Magazine said that the Golden Gate Bridge, a government project, would never carry more traffic than the existing ferry boat system, a prediction that has been proven wrong every 5 minutes during rush hour. In the days of Pat Brown's Golden California, the State Water Project was characterized by his chief of staff as a reckless gamble, ballooned to be 3/4 the cost of the size of the state budget, opposed by labor, opposed by the San Francisco Chronicle, who called the project impossible. Impossible. He went to sleep that night losing by 20,000 votes, wins, fundamentally changes California. The notion is that the elegance and genius, as I have traveled the world and been almost every special district, province, and autonomous region and municipality in China, the magic of California. People see it that way all across the world. When I travel to Africa or to India or Sri Lanka or any other part of the world, nobody talks about Biloxi, Mississippi, or the places, the number of communities that we have in California. Is there a challenge? I know that there's some controversy whether enough people are leaving or coming or whatever. But again, I put this in context. And the last context I want to put is it was a great conversation between the very famous and critically important world leader, Zhou Enlai, who's the premier of China, and Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger turns to the premier and says, what do you think about the French Revolution? And the premier turns to Mr. Kissinger and quietly says, so far, so good. The point is that the culture in China takes the long view. The culture that I'm trying to share with you today is to take the long view. Whether people want to complain about a bullet train where China has 17 of them, or whatever. We see this all the time. And those of us who are visionaries, who drive this place, that's the magic of California, do not get deterred by that short-term thinking. And in my house in Los Angeles, I have a tequila bar. And on that tequila bar, you have all these painted bottles of tequila. I've got Arnold Schwarzenegger that says, Que fuerte. In Spanish, that means how strong. And then I have a bottle for Gavin Newsom. And the bottle says, future man, future man. Because if you know this governor, he embodies the essence of thinking about the future. If you've read his book, Citizen Bill, thinking about technology, in his first State of the State, talking about data dividends, engaging. If you sit down and spend time with him, the thing that lights up his eyes, that lights up the eyes of California, is thinking about the future, thinking about technology, thinking about new ways to invent things. That's what excites me about him. That's why I think that he's leading California. And I'm so happy that he shows the level of respect and attention to participate in this conference. And with that, I want to turn it over to Gavin Newsom. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for including me, Darlene. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody, it's Governor Gavin Newsom, and it's a real honor for me to briefly talk to you a little bit about the future of our economy, not only here in California, but the future of the economy in California that impacts the rest of the economy all throughout the nation. To be here to talk a little bit about reimagining, not just rebuilding it here at home. I think you all would agree California's assets are unparalleled innovation, the entrepreneurial spirit that defines the best of the state, the diversity of our people, our world-class higher education system, as well as the history of leadership are why so many of us are here today. This is a state that sees opportunities always and knows that we can solve vexing and challenging problems, but only if we focus on a mindset of growth and inclusion, where everyone has a seat at the table. So as we tackle these difficult and challenging issues like recovering from this pandemic-induced recession, addressing issues like climate change and the climate crisis, as well as reimagining and redefining the jobs of the future, we come with a mindset that California will continue to lead the nation. Just think about this, talk about leadership. Which in the last couple of months, Californians added almost 300,000 new jobs to the economy, 275,700 just in the last 2 months to be exact. Just think about the February jobs numbers, 41%. 41% of America's jobs came from the state of California. So when we talk about this economy coming back, we talk about it coming roaring back. But it will only come back if we're mindful of the work that still needs to be done. And while we're proud to have 25 million shots into people's arms, better, by the way, than all but 5 nations, and the fact that we continue to have the lowest positivity rate in the nation, we are mindful of the significant work ahead of us, not only to get more vaccines, more shots into people's arms, but to do the good work that we've done by continuing to do what we refer to as all the non-pharmaceutical interventions, like continuing to wear face coverings and wear face masks. If we do, we are well on our way, on track to fully reopen this economy beyond the blueprint by June 15th, in just a number of weeks. So as we continue to do that, as we continue to focus on our efforts to reimagine and rebuild, let us remind ourselves that we can't run that 90-yard dash. And if we run the 100-yard dash, I assure you, we're going to get out of this tunnel, and that bright light that we see at the end of that tunnel will be brighter still. What's more, and speaking of brighter, than just getting through this difficult pandemic-induced recession is also doing it with some healthy reserves. In fact, we are enjoying the highest reserves in our state's history. We're enjoying a surplus, not a deficit, despite the challenges and some of the headwinds associated with this COVID-induced recession. We're running a general fund revenue surplus just since January of some $14.3 billion above the January forecast, some $3.8 billion, exceeding the February cash flow estimates. When I say, again, we're not just coming back, again, there's proof points that the state really will come roaring back. And I'll continue to say this as a small business person myself, someone who's proud to have created hundreds of jobs in this state as a small business person, that this is the best damn state to do business. I really believe that. And by the way, don't take my word for it. Just consider the 442,000 individuals who filed for new business license during 2020. By the way, that's 21.7% increase from the year prior. That gives you a sense of people's optimism about the fate and future of this state. California continues not only to be the #1 innovative state according to Bloomberg Index, but continues to lead the nation in those new business starts. We're still the most innovative state in the nation, receiving over half, 50% of our nation's venture capital funding. Look at all the new IPOs, not just in 2020, but look at all the new IPOs so far this year. Some of the biggest in the world, continuing to lead, dominate, candidly, in that space. We're also investing in your space, in innovation, in entrepreneurialism, investing in the important engines of our growth, each and every one of you. In our proposed January budget, we included close to $750 million for job, not only creation, but job retention. Got to have a retention strategy as we continue to support our entrepreneurs and startups. I also included, by the way, new tax incentives through our California Competes program. It's a new grant program we're also going to establish to help support investments and job creation here in the state. We're always mindful, as I said a moment ago, just not only focusing on growth, but equity. And I'm really proud, Adobe, Mattel, Twitter, among them, that recently signed on to California's Equal Pay Pledge. It's gender equality as well. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, there are no wealth taxes, no corporate taxes being proposed that from my perspective, no capital gains, long-term, capital gains tax or even short-term that are being proposed. That if they get to my desk, they'll also be vetoed. In fact, there hasn't been a general tax increase in California in close to a decade. Last one was approved by the voters in 2012. I know today is a great opportunity, worthwhile opportunity for each and every one of us to learn from each and every one of us in this state. And I commend you for thinking big, continuing to push beyond the boundaries that California so often does of expectations, and continue to look beyond even jurisdiction, not only in Northern California, the Bay Area, but the impact you can have all across our state. I wish you well in these series of ongoing discussions, and I look forward to learning more of your conclusions and your recommendations at the end of the discussions. Take care, everybody.
And with that, the words from our future and forward-looking governor, I've always called him a visionary. Oops. I've always called my former boss a visionary person and a leader, and now we are joined by Ms. Dee Dee Myers. She is the Senior Advisor and Director of Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Dee Dee.
Thank you, Darlene, and thank you for having us here today, for having the governor kick off this great conference, and for GlobalSF for the work that you do, and for including GoBiz. We really appreciate you being part of this conversation. It's such an important topic as we look not across the state, but around the world for opportunities to continue to grow California. So just following up a bit on what the governor did, he certainly presented his visionary future. And to my old friend, Senator Hertzberg, he has always been a visionary, and I think that vision continues to resonate. As we come through this pandemic, one of the things that we've really tried to focus on, and I think it's fundamental to California's success, is making sure that not only is our approach to distributing the vaccination, but also to coming through the recession and building back our economy, that we do that equitably. And I think that's a key, again, to the culture of California that welcomes ideas, that welcomes new ways of thinking about things and doing things. It is built on that foundation of valuing everybody. And one of the things that we need to continue to do as we get through this recession is to value everybody. So as the governor certainly talked eloquently about how we've been successful in distributing the vaccine. We're now in the top 10 states in terms of shots in arms. More than 50% of Californians who are eligible have at least one shot, which is great news, which means we can move toward that June 15th reopening date safely, led by science, which is another thing we pride ourselves here in California, is we're led by science, we're led by data, and we're also led by our compassionate and inclusive hearts. So we're going to make sure that as we distribute those vaccines, that we get them into the communities that have been most impacted, that have seen and lived and experienced the devastating effects of this more than anybody else. And that's essential, not only because those people continue to be our communities of color and our people around the state in very heavily impacted areas continue to be on the front lines of the pandemic as we wrap it up, but they will also be essential to building back strongly. So we need to make sure that we get the Golden State stimulus into the hands of people who need that additional cash. We need to continue to distribute our rent subsidies and for both renters and landlords to make sure that people can stay in their homes and get back to work. We need to make sure that as we and that our small businesses also get the funds and the help that they need to get back on their feet. With the support of the legislature, Senator Hertzberg and others, the governor signed a $2.5 billion worth of small business grants. Most of those have been distributed. We're entering the very last phase of that in next week. The final application period opens, but that will be, again, $2.5 billion small loans into the hands of tens of thousands of small businesses. We're at about 120,000 businesses who've received grants so far, and there'll be more before this is all said and done. But that's, again, making sure that we recover, that we recover equitably, that we recover in a way that includes everybody in our economy. That work does not stop when we reopen in June. It does not stop when we get kids back in school in September. It has to be fundamental to our rebuilding. So that's one of the reasons that we're a beacon to the rest of the world. As Senator Hertzberg so eloquently said, why people look at California differently and why they know this is the home of innovation, why it's the home of new ideas and new business starts and all the capital. We see that more than half of the nation's investment capital comes here, not by accident, but intentionally, because we are committed to values that value everyone, that value new ideas, that value science, that put data and facts first, and build an economy that works for all. So again, thank you for the work that you do, for the conversations that you host, for having us here today as part of that. Thank you again to Darlene for your leadership, and look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Thank you so much, Dee Dee, and thank you so much for the partnership with GoBiz. We look forward to working with you and to many more future events. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And now, for the reason why we are all dialed in today, I am pleased to invite my longtime friend and colleague, and who's the Senior Advisor on Policy at GlobalSF, Dr. Newman Bruce Pickering. He's been the chief architect of this project and will be leading today's conversation with our panel of esteemed speakers. Bruce?
Thank you very much, Darlene. And I think this is going to be a really great conversation, a fascinating conversation. It's the first of 6 that we have planned to discuss the impact of the pandemic on California's economy. And the underlying theme, as you all know, is how does California remain in the forefront of innovation, job creation, livability, and sustainable urbanization. The topics we selected were the result of 4 planning sessions held last fall. There were, of course, many more we could have picked, but these seem to be very representative of the key issues that the state is confronting in these most unusual times. This keynote conversation is designed to set the stage for the follow-on sessions, and I am delighted to have with me in this opening session Michael Spence, a Nobel Prize economist and former dean of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, Jonathan Wetzel, a director of the McKinsey Global Institute and co-chair of the Urban China Initiative at McKinsey, and Paul Granillo, president and CEO of the Inland Empire Economic Partnership. So my first question then is to Michael. I mean, given the chance that we have to hear from one of the world's great economists, and it's a broad question. And it's simply this: given the enormity of the economic downturn, can we tease out a few of the most important elements that might better help us understand what we need to do at the state level, particularly, to cope with the radical changes that have emerged in the past year?
Thank you, Bruce, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. As I said earlier, I expect to learn a great deal from this. I couldn't help being impressed by the optimism and commitment to the future and the long term that the governor and Senator Hertzberg and Dee Dee Myers expressed. And I was reminded of when Senator Hertzberg was speaking about Mark Twain's famous quote when somebody told him that a journalist told him that his death had been reported. And Mark Twain said, "The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated." I think, California is an astonishing economy viewed by an economist. It has virtually everything you can imagine in terms of opportunity and challenge. And so I think that the setting is exactly right. So I think, when you're tackling challenges and trying to be practical about it, you need to know where you are. And so Bruce asked me to take a bit of a tour that goes beyond the boundaries of California, of what's going on in the global economy. So I'm going to try to do that. Let me preface the remarks by simply saying these are very unusual conditions and relatively little is certain at this point, but one can make educated guesses if you're reasonably humble about it. So I'd like to focus on 2 things. One is the recovery itself, which I think we're in, and the short term, and then a little bit more about what the opportunities are and challenges as we come out of the recovery and try to build inclusive, successful, sustainable economies. So let me start briefly with Asia. China and a number of countries in Asia basically are the only countries in the world that controlled the pandemic without the access to vaccines. They are in V-shaped recoveries. China was the only major economy with positive real growth in 2020, and it is probably going to grow at 6% this year. And that will pull a whole lot of Asia along, and that's a very good thing. They will also have a vaccination program, which will give them some additional insurance. Next comes the United States, the UK, and Israel. Israel is astonishingly quickly vaccinated and pretty much open for business. The UK is well on its way on that track, and the United States, I think, since the start of the year, has been extraordinarily impressive. So we are vaccinating at an enormously high rate. And that has caused a very, very strong rapid recovery that's well underway in our economy. If we have a little time, I could decompose it, but basically we have sectors that did very well in the pandemic and they are not subsiding. But the most important thing from both the point of view of economic growth and employment is that the sectors that were suppressed or literally closed down are now opening up. And that's good for almost everything. It's good for employment, it's good for growth, and it's good for equity, because the people that were put out of business in those sectors, hospitality, etc., restaurants, retail, are not in the upper end of the income distribution. So when they get their jobs back, then we're starting to reverse what was a pretty catastrophic effect of the pandemic in distributional terms. So it's looking very good. I think we'll see eye-popping growth numbers for the next little while. People should not be confused that these growth numbers indicate full recovery. That's going to take a little while, I think probably till the end of the year. Europe, where I live a fair amount of time, is the UK, is considerably slower in the vaccine rollout, has more difficulty organizing fiscal support of the type that's been a major benefit in the United States, both under the previous administration and now again under the current administration in Washington. But nevertheless, what I described in the United States with a lag is going to happen in Europe. Maybe not quite as strong, but they will be joining us. Once you get past essentially the developed countries, then things look a lot more complicated and diverse. So India, which was doing fairly well, a very, very large, important, growing economy with growth potential, probably around 7 or 8% a year, has recently had a very serious outbreak. They have run 5 or 6 days in a row with 200,000 cases a day. Translated into the United States, that would be about 50,000 cases a day, which is about the high point that we hit on the way through our wrestling with the pandemic before the vaccines arrived at our doorstep. Brazil is also experiencing a serious surge and is in serious trouble. And just to cut this short, the poorer developing countries are simply waiting for vaccines. And I think the hope, and it's an important hope, is that once the major players, with the higher incomes, developed and middle income countries are pretty much through the vaccine rollout, that the global attention will turn to making sure that we don't have a disastrous delay in getting vaccines to the rest of the world. I think there's a widespread understanding, but it's worth repeating that really none of us are safe, especially in the presence of variants, until we've basically made sure everyone is safe. So the brief summary, Bruce, is, in the next year and a half, we can expect, budget surpluses of the type that the governor mentioned. We will have a cascading series of very rapid recoveries, and we will, be able, we'll have the luxury of turning to the longer term future. In the aftermath, I think we're going to see several things. We will see a continued acceleration in digital adoption that was forced on us essentially during the pandemic economy, with huge amounts of opportunity associated with that. And California couldn't be better positioned to kind of participate in this accelerated sort of transformation of our economies to working on essentially digital foundations. But there are going to be some challenges. The damage from the pandemic economy in terms of businesses, especially small and medium, but not confined to small and medium-sized businesses. There's been some pretty big bankruptcies in the retail sector, even among the large, brand name players. And that damage will, represent the headwind that will take time to overcome. If you sort of look out into the future, and I'll kind of conclude with this, we are, I think, we have a reasonable chance, and I base this on work that I've done with Jonathan Wetzel and his colleagues, particularly James Manika. He and I have just penned a paper. I think we're going to have a dramatic reversal in the downward trend in productivity. And it will have a digital component that's very important. There are a number of reasons for thinking that, but the basic idea is the conditions are favorable. The tools are powerful and they're ready for prime time. The demand side is going to be supported by the fiscal authorities through the pandemic support system, but also the currently negotiated infrastructure, so-called infrastructure bill. And we have states that are going to have the resources and the commitment to dealing with challenges like the training of a workforce. The key thing I want to mention, and then I will stop, is that for this prediction to come true, the digital transformation of our economy has to move out of the advanced sectors where it's already occurred throughout the economy. It's got to move through every sector, and it's got to move through every size of business, including the small and medium-sized ones, or it won't happen. And so I think in terms of items on the priority list, making sure that we identify obstacles and so on. We have a favorable environment. People are now understand how important it is to get on with this. We can thank the pandemic for overcoming inertia that characterizes all people and all organizations. We tend to do today what we did yesterday, and we're not going to do that this time around. So I think we have an enormous opportunity, and I look forward to hearing people's views about how to exercise the options that are before us.
Thank you very much, Michael. And next up is, I'd like to ask Jonathan. So we've gotten some nice sort of big picture thoughts from Michael, and he's referenced, I think, some important points that you, in fact, and he have been in conversation about. So it's a nice segue into maybe looking at which ones of those are of particular interest to the state itself, and ways that we might start this conversation, thinking about how we implement some of those ideas. And before you answer, just briefly, if you're in the audience and you have questions, just put them in the Q&A, and we have a small but mighty group of individuals who will sort through them and send them to me. So Jonathan, I would love to hear some thoughts you have on how to take some of these big picture thoughts and put them a little more into a localized or statewide context.
All right, sure, and a real pleasure, Bruce. Thanks for the thanks for the opportunity to have a chat. So, I mean, I think we have to start by where we were before the pandemic, and the growth that we had seen in California. And as the governor has said, I mean, this is and has been a very successful economy. Just if we look at the year before the pandemic, it's growing at 3.3% growth compared to 1.7% across the country. The 53% of the Fortune 500 located in the state of California, 118 months of a record jobs expansion. Everything looked pretty good. And a lot of that built on technology and innovation. If we look across the 5,000 odd corporate locations in California, good 18% of them are research and development, significantly higher than in Germany or across the country. So very much a technology innovation driven economy. But with that also a singular flaw, I mean, if you will, and the inequality of the economy equally large, equally apparent, that huge gaps between top decile and bottom decile families in terms of income, $260,000 for the top decile, $21,000 for the bottom. and growth and a growing gap that the top earners, top 10% earners, growing at wages at three times at the bottom wages growth rates. So that is a fair picture. And one last thing to add to that is the fragility, if you will, of California, and that this was a good period running into the pandemic, but there is a significant amount of fragility, both in physical terms, since that we all are, got very familiar with a longer wildfire season last year, orange skies over San Francisco, but also the volatility in our state's finances, particularly due to the heavy reliance on personal income taxes. As a result, difficult to predict exactly what might be our revenues in the next year or so. So with that, I mean, what did the pandemic do? And the pandemic, first of all, a unprecedented crisis. So we went from 4% unemployment in February to 16% in April. That never happened before. And now by November or December, back at 8%. So, but we had a massive crisis. And particularly, as we said, a crisis of unemployment in low-income jobs. Essentially, high-income earners stopped spending money, and with that, low-income earners lost their jobs. And that was the crisis, and it had a number of responses. The first was the unprecedented digital response. We had 10 years of digital acceleration in 1 year. So there's massive increases in everything online, whether three basic channels. One is remote work, which you come back to, which essentially the work from home. The second is e-commerce and fulfillment, and everybody buying everything online. And the third is automation, the replacement of labor with capital. Some cases because you didn't have labor, but other places just simply because it was a good opportunity to start thinking about efficiency. So with all of that, I mean, we've come through a very dark time, but now we start to see innovation. We start to see innovation in policy. Let's not overlook the successes that we've had in Roomkey and HomeKey as examples of starting to make a difference in terms of new approaches to addressing long-running gaps in the social fabric, and of course innovation in the business sector, as we've seen, particularly as Michael notes, in large companies. And so that all that digital response was very much led by larger companies, and that they were the ones making the investments in automation. They were the ones leading the way through e-commerce and fulfillment, and they were the ones leading the way through work from home and remote work changes in habits and places. So that's kind of where we have. How does that affect overall fabric? Well, I mean, some things are a little too soon to tell. There's been a lot of discussion about the exodus from California. We would say that is definitely too soon to tell. What we've seen so far is more of an intra-California discussion, where people have moved from center to suburb. That does seem to be happening. But on the other hand, that has net resulted in real estate prices being quite robust. And so it's a little too early to, as Michael says, that the rumors of my demise are greatly exaggerated. The thing that we ask ourselves then, okay, is going forward, where does that leave us? I mean, our historic strengths of innovation, of technological strengths, will they be maintained? Will our weakness in inequality, ultimately result in a greater crisis or an acceleration of the crisis that we've had before? And we would argue that is the central question: can we restore? What kind of an economic scenario will we wind up seeing? Are we going to be seeing something akin to, let's say, a post-World War II expansion? Where we saw the benefits of productivity extending across the entire economy with a massive return of demand? Are we going to see something maybe a little bit closer to what we had in the last recession, in the response to the global financial recession, where those benefits were spread, but they were not equally spread. That essentially accrued to a relatively smaller portion of the population. What will be the what will be driving those decisions? We think is, first of all, on the technology side, as Michael said, it's like how are we going to be able to spread the benefits of all of this response, the technological innovation to everybody. Not just to the large companies, but to the small ones, and particularly to SMEs and to communities, which would otherwise not have the benefit of using this technology. I think that is one important question that has a lot to do with labor, a lot to do with reskilling, and education, as the governor's task force on jobs has noted, that we need to find ways of creating lifelong opportunities for transitions. Moving within jobs to increase the technological content of those jobs and to increase the ability of people, each and every person in an industry, be that much more productive, as well as, of course, across occupations as the mix of the economy evolves. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we need to support demand, because without demand, we are simply not going to have supply either. The old joke of Henry Ford and I think Walter Rubin from the union, sort of looking through the auto plant and saying, like, say Henry Ford showing off all of his robots and his automation, and then Walter Rubin was sort of saying, well, Henry, who's going to buy all your cars? So we also need to find ways of ensuring that labor and that workers have a decent living wage, and importantly, the costs, which have been escalating in many ways, are reduced or are enabled to survive, are at levels which allow for a living wage. And we include in that, of course, as we've seen over the last years, housing, education, and healthcare. 3 buckets of costs which we in the state of California need to get a handle on. And so we say those are the 2 real questions. A ability to spread productivity across the broad landscape of small and medium-sized enterprises and communities in the state of California, and the ability to ensure to restore demand through rising wages and through managed or at least competitive cost structures, particularly in the things that matter to the vast majority of Californians. With that, we'd argue that there is an opportunity here. This is not a time to shrink. This is a time to grow. This is a time for a bold, green Marshall Plan, if you will, for the state of California, a recovery which bears in mind the important principles that this state is built on, and justice and inclusiveness, but also innovation and a forward-looking mentality that says we can and will do this and become a beacon not only for the state, but for the country and the world as a whole. So thank you very much. A few remarks there.
A few very thought-provoking remarks. Okay, Paul. So we actually are delighted to have you maybe potentially address how some of these areas that both Michael and Jonathan have mentioned, and then maybe bring it down to an area, because one of the things that's most important for you is that you represent a regional organization dedicated, I think, to the economic growth and prosperity of the Inland Empire. And I think, it's a bit of a metaphor. There's much of the state that I think has many of the same challenges and opportunities that the Inland Empire does. And I'd like to invite you to maybe address some of these, particularly in light of some of the comments that both Jonathan and Michael have made.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel. As a proud alumni of California State University at San Bernardino, it's an honor to be on the same panel as Jonathan and Michael. So a little shout out to my alma mater. Because we're worldwide in this conversation, I want to talk a little bit about California's Inland Empire. So the Inland Empire, east of the eastern part of California, the counties of San Bernardino and Riverside, about 11% of Californians, 4.6 million people. Of those 4.6 million people, 50% are Latino. So it's the 5th largest Latino population in the United States. And one of our major issues is growth. We continue to grow by about 50,000 people every year. And it gives us great opportunities, but challenges. And one of our issues that drives our economy is our baccalaureate attainment. So of regions of over 1 million people in the United States, California's Inland Empire has the lowest baccalaureate attainment in the country. So of our 4.6 million people, we're talking about 21%. If you apply that to the half of the population that's Latino, in the Latino population, that's 9%. And so that has kept us from being able to participate in many parts of the innovation economy. And so as I listen to Michael and Jonathan, the lived reality of the economic forces that affect our region is directly tied to the two presentations you've just heard. And so we as a region have traditionally been heavily dependent on manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. And over the years, we have become a worldwide logistics hub. And that has everything to do with the fact of our vicinity to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. So about 42% of all imports that come through the ports come to the Inland Empire and then are repackaged, repurposed, and then sent to the rest of the country. So this is a major center of jobs for us. But it also becomes a major point of contention in California's economy, because we're talking ships, and we're talking trains, and we're talking trucks, and we're talking warehouses. At the same time, we need to take advantage of what we've been given. And there are great opportunities for, I think, the state to become an absolute leader in the movement of goods and supply chain, and to help meet the state's climate goals by working towards near zero and zero emission ways to transport the goods that you and I consume. And so as I listen to Michael and Jonathan, I want to reflect our region's sense of urgency. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and so I call this the Monica imperative. You know, I want her to have the California dream, right? And yet she has more advantages than just the average 9-year-old in the Inland Empire, maybe in the state. And that's because, you know, her mother has a PhD, works at the University of California's medical school in Riverside. I've been lucky enough to work in economic development and to really be able to understand many perspectives and forces that most people don't. And so we have a way to help her. But that Monica imperative, I want all of us to apply to all the 9-year-olds. The issues that we're dealing with when we talk about automation, for studies have been done in the Inland Empire that say up to 35 to 60% of our jobs are susceptible to automation. So how are we taking advantage of that and training the workforce that's going to be needed for the care and feeding of robotic systems, automated systems, artificial intelligence? But there's an imperative to that. We can't wait. As you heard, the implementation of automation was always a few years out, and now we're seeing it here on the ground. It's happening now. And so we are seeing that job displacement. The issues around workforce training, lots of debates and policy that goes into this. But if we don't focus on creating the bridge between the employers and the educators, people are going to go unemployed because they're not going to have the proper skills to be successful in the workforce today. Besides urgency, I think we need a plan. And I don't always see us being good planners. We talk about the issues, but we don't put pen to pencil and say, you know, together, government, business, labor, environment, how are we going to get to point B, right? And I really want, in the conversations that are going to follow this one, that we be working on the creation of a plan together. I think we need a plan that is regions focused. The Inland Empire is not the Silicon Valley. It's not even Los Angeles. It is its own unique sub-economy. And California is made up of many of them. And the best solutions to housing issues, workforce issues, the future of work issues are going to be when it's done at the sub-regional level, and when the regions are respected and leadership in those regions who at a granular level knows the history of the region, knows the players in the region, knows what's worked in the past and failed in the past. Those are important people to be involved in the conversation. And then to the equity issue. I am a man of color, okay? I'm a Mexican American. My family has been in this part of California for 125 years, okay? When I hear equity, right, I have to ask the question, where was this in the mix before, right? My mother and father can remember being allowed to go to the city pool plunge on Thursdays, the last Thursday of the month, because that's when the Black and Mexican kids could go because they drained it on Friday, right? So issues around equity for those of us of color, right? It's like, well, we've heard that before. And so the question I have as we move into this post-pandemic time is that just going to go away when the economy's booming and everybody's doing fine? Are we just going to forget about that? Because these issues of equity, when it comes to educational attainment, I said 9% of our Latino population has a baccalaureate degree. That's been going on for decades. And what are we going to do to change that? If we don't fund our Cal State San Bernardino, our University of California, Riverside at an equitable level that allows our students to actually get those degrees, then there's something systemic that we're allowing to remain. And then on the issues around job creation versus regulation, we have to remember that with regulation can come job loss. And is that being done in an equitable way? Are we having discussions with the people whose jobs we are potentially regulating away? The same with taxes and same with housing costs that don't allow people of color to build wealth over time. So just a few comments about how the rubber meets the road in the Inland Empire. Pleasure to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Paul. Okay, so I think that to me, one of the most interesting themes that ran through, and by the way, we, just so that our audience knows that we had a brief planning call, but that these discussions have not been scripted. But I picked up a very clear theme from Michael to Jonathan to Paul, which is the one that really, if you don't address the state's issues of inequality, if you don't make sure that the regions inland as well as on the coast participate in the new state economy, the state won't go nearly as far as it could, and indeed might not really take off at all, is what I'm taking away. And so I have a couple of questions here, which I think are really important. And we have actually internally had this conversation. What are some specific areas? I mean, we have Paul saying you need to focus this on a more regulatory, a regionalized approach. You have Jonathan saying that if you don't really spread the opportunities outward, you won't really, make a dent in the state's, ability to recover. And then Michael has made the point that even globally, this is an issue, but certainly in California, you need to wire these communities and make them, train them up to the ability to participate in the global economy. So I'd like to come back a little bit, maybe Jonathan first. Jonathan, are there some specific policies that you and Michael, you and the state, you and Bob Hertzberg have talked about? Maybe start with the low-hanging fruit, but look at, we have this interesting moment in time. We've got a state budget that's flush in complete kind of contraindication of what we expected. And so we have this unique moment that probably won't last. So you have this extra budget surplus. What would you do with this money and the regulatory environment, the ability of the state and the willingness of the state to listen to get this into the bloodstream of the state's economy? Jonathan, I think you're on mute.
I am, thank you. I wish I could wave a magic wand and sort of answer the, just sort of, this will all be different now. But I think simply the fact that we have a bit more money than we planned is certainly not going to answer the problem. But it does give us a moment to pause and reflect. What if we did things differently? What if we didn't have the tired answer like, well, we have no money to fall back on? Because now we do. We actually have a bit more money. So what would we do differently? And that is the innovation challenge, let's just say. Because to be clear, we're going to need a bigger boat. The amount of money that it will take, the investment in public goods to restore equality in the state of California is a lot more money than is in the current state budget. So we estimated that if you were to try to provide actual housing for the affordable housing in the city of Los Angeles, for the targets that are in the 8-year current regional housing needs assessment, that would be $120 billion. Now, that's a lot more money than the city of county of Los Angeles has right now. So let's be clear, we're going to need a bigger boat. But we are going to use this opportunity to crowd that capital in, to rethink our approach to public goods and to invest more in them. And I would argue that there are a couple of really critical public goods that we have gone too far for too long to underinvest in. One of the most important is housing. Equally important is what Paul's raising around education and skills and the opportunity of every person in the state of California to get access to this new wave of technology. And that can't be only for the people under the age of 25, incidentally. It needs to be for all of us. So that is like, how are we going to enable every person to become eligible and to be engaged in the process of improving their livelihood by using technology? I mean, that needs to be a mandate, and that needs something that is a public good that we're going to have to find a way to invest in. So I think on the invest side, in worker transitions, to enable transitions within occupations and across occupations, and to invest in public goods such as housing, I mean, that would be very much at the top of my list. And I think we have to do it in a smart way, of course. We can't just rely on the public money to do that. I said we're going to need a bigger boat. So we're going to need to find ways to work public and private together in order to achieve that. And the good news is there are ways and there are successful examples. The other part of it, I think, is innovation. And that our state is built on innovation. It's built on the ability of us to build a better mousetrap and then sell it to other people. But we have to build it. And I think the cost of regulation is just that. It is a cost. There is a cost to regulation. We should be clear on that. And we should be thinking about how we think about the regulations that enable innovation. What is the regulatory construct that allows us to safeguard the public good, but to do so in a way which supports innovation, not constrains it? I will give an example. QR codes. I'm spending a lot of time in China. If you want to be a digital business in China, you make a photocopy of a QR code. You are now a digital business. You're done. In the United States, you buy an NFC reader. It costs you $500. There's a difference. So if you're a small and medium-sized enterprise, it costs you more to become digital in the United States than it does in China. That's a very, that is a function of technology, but it's also a function of regulation. I would urge us to think about what are the things that we can do to unlock the demand that every small and medium-sized enterprise has to become a technologically enabled enterprise, to be that much more productive, to tap into that stream of revenues, to go online, to get access to a global marketplace. There's lots that we could do. So those two things, invest and innovate. I mean, those would be my uses for the policy money.
Michael, you've mentioned in some of your writing, which I've read, that it's very difficult sometimes to get money targeted from on high, that it's difficult to I think reach the audiences you need to reach. And I'm curious on this, are there any mechanisms? I mean, should we looking at block grants? Is it mostly regulation? What are some of the ways we can get past that logjam and get money into the parts of the state to create these opportunities that Jonathan and Paul have so eloquently mentioned?
But it depends on which area you're talking about. But I mean, I think Paul eloquently said that effective implementation mechanisms have to be essentially local. And they have to be responsive to the conditions there, both the needs and the potential obstacles that have to be overcome. And Jonathan has said much the same thing. You know, so if we focus for a moment on the digital transformation, which I think is a key element of, you know, achieving more inclusive growth patterns, which is the overall theme that we've all been talking about. And then I think you need, you know, entities that are which engage the major players that are specifically as partners, that are specifically designed, you know, sort of like the, you know, the old agricultural, you know, technology diffusion mechanisms that we used in states in the United States to hugely great effect. We really need institutions, in other words, whose mission statement says their job is to get out there and help, you know, businesses and the people who are employed there get this transformation underway and to take advantage of it. Now we got a tailwind because, you know, whatever resistance there might have been before has been significantly diminished by the pandemic experience. I mean, you'd have to look around for a fairly long time to find somebody who would disagree with the proposition that both the future and your resilience as a business is probably going to depend a little bit on, or more than a little bit on the nature of the footprint. The other thing I would do, I mean, I think it's great, you know, to talk about California because that's the subject. But I have found repeatedly, and I suspect the McKinsey experience as well, is consistent with this, is that being local doesn't mean not learning from experience abroad. Jonathan gave an example. The QR code is a stunning achievement in mobile payments. We're getting there. We're getting there more slowly for reasons. So let me speak as a European. The Northern European countries have well-developed mechanisms for dealing with, you know, industrial transformation, digital transformation, and worker transitions. I don't mean, when I say that, you know, I don't mean that you can go to Northern Germany or Sweden and get a paste-on solution. You can't, but you can learn from it. You can learn from how they organize it, you know, who they engage in it. I mean, everybody has said correctly that you can't get this done with one sector. You need, and Paul said it clearly, you need business, government, education, labor, and other institutions in order to get that job done. So I guess my recommendation is think of creating institutions with clear mission statements and take a little while to go around the world and find out what other folks have done. And I guess the bottom line is, and don't think there's a correct answer. You know, we're dealing with really big challenges. So we have to experiment boldly with solutions, and not all of them are going to work. But if we experiment boldly, some of them will, and that will move the needle.
Thank you so much. And actually, you've reminded us that this is the most international of panels since you're in Milan, Italy, and Jonathan's in Beijing. So thank you for this. Demonstrated some of the advantages of this new economy, the new digital economy. Paul, you know, what would be one topic if you were given, you know, freedom in one area? What would the focus be for you in the Inland Empire to take some of these issues that we've raised, some of the discussions about kind of creating more equitable and just society? What would be the one thing that would help you most achieve that goal in the Inland Empire?
I think partnership, and let me take that question and turn it into two parts that reflect something that Jonathan said and something that Michael said. So Jonathan talked about the fact that, you know, yes, businesses are relocating out of California. We've seen some of the big ones, but that a lot of that movement is within the state as companies potentially are moving from the coast inland, okay? So in the Inland Empire, the reality for us is that our white collar jobs are our biggest outbound commuters. So people are with education, white collar jobs are leaving in the morning to go to Los Angeles, to go to Orange, okay, and then commuting back. So within this conversation, if we're going to talk about the use of virtual work combined with wanting to keep our businesses in California, can we not partner with the state? Can we not partner with our corporate leaders and say, you know, a vast majority of your workforce lives in the Inland Empire. Come here, where we will greet you with a hug, and you're going to add to the quality of life of your workforce. And so I think a partnership that is actively having that conversation would be very healthy. And then Michael spoke about, you know, the job loss in Kmart and Sears. I mean, you know, Kmart went bankrupt. I can remember my favorite aunt worked at J.C. Penney's, and she was always the best dressed, right? And she had a high school education, but she had a great career as a salesperson at J.C. Penney's. Those jobs, many of those are gone, and those were important jobs in retail for regions like the Inland Empire. But now, because fulfillment was already becoming a major part of our lives, and that was just absolutely multiplied in the pandemic. We want our pharmaceuticals delivered to the door. We want the dog food delivered to the door. That the pandemic has changed our way of life. And so I think we need partnerships in the Inland Empire that work on, again, helping California and California's Inland Empire lead in sustainable logistics. We have been focused on trying to create a center for sustainable logistics because some of the biggest players, Amazon is our largest private employer in the region. Their biggest footprint is here. Again, the connection to the ports, UPS, the trains, it's all here. But if we could partner with our educational institutions, higher ed institutions, bring them together with many of those corporations and create that sustainable center of logistics, we can use what we've been given and maintain our jobs while, again, we help the state to hit its climate goals.
So I want to, did somebody have a comment?
No, I just said I couldn't agree more. It's excellent. Yeah, it's exactly right.
Well, I have a question then, and moving forward, because we're going to move into the Q&A now. We're down to about 20 minutes, and I want to respect people's time. But one of the questions actually fits neatly into this, which is the issue of, you know, and I'll just read the question. Technology has traditionally penetrated sectors with little regulation more easily. Traditional industries have typically higher levels of regulation and are not particularly welcoming to new players or innovators. Well, policy mechanisms can be developed to increase the technology penetration in traditional segments and create opportunities for newcomers. And I think maybe, Michael, you're the first one that should answer that, but anybody is welcome to.
Well, there's no question that there is, as Jonathan said, there are patterns of regulation that are dysfunctional in this respect, and there are other ways to regulate that, you know, are either neutral or even positive. But I would say, you know, not directly answering the question, but one of the huge opportunities is that lagging sectors in terms of, you know, adopting modern technology outside the narrow, you know, range in which they deal is healthcare. I mean, healthcare, you know, it's not as if telemedicine wasn't an opportunity before. It's just that nobody did anything, and it's partly because of who runs the operation and so on. And now we had our hands forced, and I think we're going to see in this and a number of other sectors, maybe construction, maybe some other things, a really rapid change. And I think that will help overall. It may not immediately generate a whole lot of employment, but it'll generate benefits, including, you know, increased access to healthcare and so on. But the important point is it starts the process of spreading things out over the whole economy. I mean, these are, you know, construction, healthcare, and so on are huge employment sectors. And people don't live in one sector for their whole life, at least not everybody does. So you start spreading, you know, in the economy as a whole, people who have brushed up against, learned to live with, and work productively in environments in which technology is an increasingly powerful set of tools that you work with. And then that in combination with what we talked about before, which is mission-oriented stuff, I think it is I'll just put it bluntly, is more important, than the regulatory barriers that at least I'm aware of. Now, I don't want to dismiss the notion, but if the flip side of that question is, if we just deregulate enough, we'll get the right answer, then I'll balk.
Jonathan or Paul, do either of you want to comment?
Well, I think on this question of what policy mechanisms can you use to crowd in innovation for traditional industries? I agree with Michael that simply deregulation per se may or may not get you there, because there may be a market failure. So that you will have simply a set of players who are not motivated to innovate, and they have market power, in which case you won't get it. So if one's goal is to encourage innovation in a traditional setting, I think that one has to actually set up to do that. And so I like the ideas of challenges, of using the public sector's purchasing power to encourage to aggregate demand, and then challenge the suppliers to come up with the best solutions. That works relatively well in something like affordable housing. Actually, if we saw in Triple H and sort of the challenge grant, we got housing to go from $500,000 a unit down to $300,000 a unit by basically asking them to compete. That can work. I think that there is this point about learning is really helpful as well. It's like there is a lot of regulation which is about not invented here. That we're different. Well, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, and maybe there are things that we could import from other jurisdictions that allow you to meet your policy goals, whatever they might be, but also leave space for people to compete again. So I think it's harnessing that spirit of innovation and competition within the construct of knowing exactly what it is you're trying to protect in the public good. Sometimes we leave the public good as this sort of ethereal, spacey, let's just sort of refer to it, but not actually define it. I think if we actually defined it, we'd be able to measure it, we'd be able to protect it, and then we could let everything else be open to competition and innovation, and probably wind up with a lot better system because many more people would participate in it. So that's a bit of a theoretical point, but just competition, innovation within the construct of defining what the public good actually is. So.
Paul, you want to comment?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think when it comes to issues of regulation, if I look at our region's Coachella Valley, Palm Springs area, heavily dependent on hospitality. The Coachella Music Festival, Stagecoach, the La Quinta tennis tournament, and a number of golf events, and very devastated in the pandemic. And so to the regulatory, we need to deal with this question of a vaccination digital record. If that sector is going to be able to come back. And it's going to take a big discussion. I would also apply that to the rise of the drones and drone delivery, where things are going to be flying in the air above us, and how is that going to be regulated? And we want to take advantage of that, and yet it's going to be very complex.
So I have a question somewhat out of left field, but it's an interesting question. And thank you all for that. And it's a question about the arts and culture, which we haven't talked about. This has been a purely economic conversation looking at regulation and the state's ability to support this sort of new emerging economy. But there is a question here, which I thought was very interesting, about the importance of arts and culture, that it supports jobs, it creates industry, it creates opportunities, it makes people feel comfortable, and it provides a quality of life element. And I don't know that we can go too deeply into this, and I don't think any of you are artists, but on the other hand, although maybe you are, but more importantly, I think the issue here is, what is the role of this kind of holistic approach to quality of life, and how does that impact what we're looking at here today? Does anybody want to try that one?
Well, I'll take a shot at it. Yeah.
Go for it.
Well, go ahead, Jonathan. Yeah, over to you.
Okay, well, I mean, Paul already started to refer to it in Coachella and the festivals, and so it is obviously one of those areas and sectors where, you know, we would say as people get more money, they generally speaking want to spend more money on culture and recreation and the arts. So it is actually one of those things that we would expect to see as a bigger and more important part of an economy, pure and so just from an economic perspective. But as you're noting that you know, life is more than the economy. That it you know, when I deal a lot with developing cities and urban and a sense of place, and culture of course is integral to that, and sort of the building a sense of community and trust. Actually, it builds trust. If you go to an arts event, you're there with people who you may or never know, but you share something in common, which is this belief that this is a good thing for you, and you enjoy it. And so it actually is part of a fabric, which is again a public good. So investing in arts and culture is basically about investing in a public good, sort of creating a space for us to work together. And you know, as such, I think you know, that is the case for that investment from an all of us perspective. But like the others, I mean, I would say it's also a room for innovation. We should be encouraging this. We should be encouraging competition in the space, in the sense like the domains and venues should not be locked up by one group at the exclusion of others. We should find ways of bringing people into the public spaces so they can explore, you know, the diversity of their cultures, and that is part of a well-regulated, well-managed economy as well as a society. So,
Michael?
I completely agree with that. You know, I think one of the things that's happened in our society, and it's clearly happened in California, is that a combination of forces, some of the market forces, have essentially divided us up into separate communities. I mean, my former colleague at Harvard wrote this famous book called Bowling Alone that kind of documents how we've sort of, you know, divided up, you know, based on housing costs and other things. And these cultural things, especially ones that bring us together, I would add sporting events and so on, are, you know, this is a very complex area, but they bring us together. They bring us together in terms of interests, and they bring us together physically, at least, you know, when we're not in a pandemic economy. But Bruce, if I can add one thing that I think is not necessarily totally within control of the policymakers and leaders in California, but I think it's important to say, and that is we talk about you know, things like skills development and business development and so on as important, and I think correctly, as important elements of dealing with the inequalities that have beset our society, including in California. Now, California may look like an extreme case because it's such a big economy. It's got pretty much everything in it, unlike a lot of other places. But what I'd like to say, and I believe this very strongly, that we need to turn that around. You know, people have to invest in making these transitions. And if the starting point is extreme inequality of income and wealth, then they don't have the resources to make those investments. They're just basically making do, living day to day. They have such slim balance sheets that they don't have resources to make these investments. When a pandemic hits, their balance sheets are destroyed, notwithstanding a serious effort by the government, you know, a highly credible effort to buffer that shock and to shift some of that balance sheet damage to the public sector's balance sheet. So part of the answer to this question is the state working interactively with the federal government and through the service providers. As a part of income inequality is access to Paul mentioned this, so I'm repeating something he said, but I'll put it differently, is access to extremely high quality, very low cost, critical services like education and health. And if we don't solve that problem, then we're basically rolling a boulder up a hill and trying to deal with the inequality problem. You know, it's just too deep a hole to get out of.
Thank you for that. Paul, do you want to add one real brief comment?
No, I just totally agree with what Michael said, but to the arts, I will give a plug for the Inland Empire and invite you all in about 9 months to come to Riverside, where we will be opening the Cheech Marine Center for Chicano art. And the actor comedian Cheech Marine is the largest collector of Chicano art. And we have a public-private partnership that will bring that collection to the city of Riverside. And it will be the largest in the world. And I can tell you, I'm working on that, Bruce. It is rejuvenating through the pandemic to have worked on economic recovery and workforce recovery, but then to be able to focus on the arts and the pleasure that that is bringing to the group that's working on that. And I think that's something that is part of our quality of life. We need to always be in contact with.
Thank you very much. So I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I'm going to go a little outward on this one to sort of the international, which is one of our segments is going to look at the importance of two segments actually. One looks at investment and retention of business, and then the second one is more focused on the role between Chinese investment has played certainly in the last 10 years. And I think a question is, what role can California do? What kind of positive role can California play in the sort of great power competition that seems to be emerging between the United States and China right now? And I realize that's an ultra expansive question, but I think all three of you would probably have some thoughts about Chinese investment. And Jonathan, of course, is in Beijing right now. So Jonathan, maybe we start with you.
Right. Well, interesting. I mean, California is the 5th largest economy in the world. China is the 2nd. Probably the 2nd and the 5th should have something to do with each other. So, I mean, I figure that, at the minimum, this is a discussion around economic relationships, trade, investment, and job creation. And yeah, I mean, I think that the state of California and the people of California owe it to themselves to, explore the Chinese marketplace and take advantage of what it offers. And benefit hopefully from any of the investment opportunities that it might present, but also importantly to treat it as a marketplace. And I think California companies are doing that and can do that and have done that and will continue to do that very successfully. That is all within the construct of the broader relationship, of course. And I will only sort of quote Tony Blinken by basically saying, okay, we will cooperate where we can, we'll compete everywhere else, and we'll confront where we must. So, all right, that's pretty clear. I think that there are plenty of opportunities for cooperation. There are important themes, climate change amongst the most important of those, but a lot of it's going to be very competitive. And so I think in that context of understanding the competition from China, very important, the technological skills, the ecosystem that exists on that side of the ocean, as well as the weaknesses and the opportunities to gain competitive advantage in the marketplace, and so what you can bring to it. I mean, there are a lot of very successful California companies in China, and I mean, I'm sitting next to a very big auto plant that is built by a California company, so doing quite well. Thank you very much. That is definitely something of a call to arms, if you will. That that this is a new world. It's a Pacific century. California is part of the Pacific. And I wouldn't say China's alone, incidentally. I think that this is more of an Asia question than a China question. And that California should view itself as part of the Asian century and invest in that and compete in that successfully.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jonathan, but I have to say, I don't think politicians and policymakers can diverge too much from what their citizens actually believe and think. And if you believe any of the polls that have been conducted on both sides of the Pacific, the citizens of these two countries that are now, in relatively tense relationships are pretty sure that the other folks are misbehaving or aren't properly governed or a whole lot of other things that, we could talk about for a long time. And so I think, objectively, there are opportunities for competition and cooperation. I think there will be a serious attempt to try to sidestep the tensions and deal with those. But one has to be realistic. I mean, a vast majority of America, it's often said in America that the one issue that's, where there's bipartisan agreement is, antipathy to China, right? So that, I think, limits, at least to some extent, the kind of policy responses that are So I think, the answer to this is, it's going to take time, and we need to work toward a more productive relationship. But I think you just have to be pragmatic in this environment. Bill Wrench testified before Congress and said multinational companies that are straddling these boundaries are taking advantage of big opportunities on both sides of the Pacific, but they're also at risk. They could easily, very easily, find themselves in situations where if they comply with the laws and regulations in one jurisdiction, they're out of compliance in kind of a serious way in the other jurisdiction. So it's not a risk-free environment at all.
Got it. So I actually have one last question, but it's very, very short to each of you. And I think I'll start with Paul, if that's okay, which is if there was one area that we would explore either in this session or actually beyond these sessions that we really didn't get to, what would that be?
Regionalized economic development for the state. Again, reflecting back what jobs or lack of jobs in certain parts of the state are needed. And then how do we cooperate? How do we bring research and development? How do we bring corporate decision makers and embed them in regions that need them and can benefit not just the region, the state as a whole?
Great. Jonathan?
I totally agree with what Paul says. But I'd add the missing middle. I mean, I think that the issue here is that we have quite a few rich people. We have quite a few very big companies. We have the highest share of low-wage jobs in the country, of major states. What we're missing is the middle. So how do we enable the middle? How do we enable the low wage to become middle wage, to restore the middle class dream, which is, I think, very linked to this question of regionalized growth.
Great. And Michael, we started with you, so it's sort of a nice symmetry to end with you.
No, I can be brief. I agree with Paul and Jonathan. And I think what the state can do is commit itself to regional development in two ways. One, by providing the assets that are needed to get it done in the regions. And secondly, to provide the I'll call it technical support, for want of a better word. But in terms of priorities, I agree with my colleagues. I'd put it right at the top.
Terrific. Well, I am sorry, there were a lot of really good questions I could not get to. We'll try, actually, many of these questions will be addressed over the course of the next 6 weeks or so when we go through these. But on behalf of GlobalSF, I would like to thank everybody here, Paul Gradillo, Jonathan Wetzel, and Michael Spence, for your insights. It's a great start to this conversation, and I genuinely appreciate you all giving us the benefit of your insights. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass the baton back to Darlene Chu Bryant, Executive Director of GlobalSF.
Great. Thank you so much, Bruce. You moderated a really great conversation, and really appreciate Paul, Jonathan, and Michael for joining us for today's conversation. I should note that today's conversation is the seed for a working group tomorrow that will be addressing all the topics raised today. We realized we were not able to get through and answer every single question that was posed by you, the participants. So mind you, we will be asking our working group that will be convening tomorrow. This group will be charged with coming up with recommendations to our state, federal, and even local legislators on how do we address, whether it be regional economic development or what have you. So please join us again for our next conversation on the international space, value and supply chains, same time next Wednesday, April 28th, 10 a.m. PST. Again, please join us on our website if you want to check us out, www.globalsf.biz. We do have podcasts and teasers on every single panel that is coming up in the next 5 weeks now. I want to again thank you all for joining us. It's 11:33. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.